and then but then it was, I think, like the internet itself was invented by DARPA, by the DoD, and it's certainly caused plenty of problems for the U.S. government too. These things, these inventions, like they're Frankenstein's monsters. They come back and bite the inventor plenty often, and I think that's what's happened with Tor. I mean, it is out of the government's control now, and it's created things like WikiLeaks and the dark web. But it's just fascinating to see that the government is still using it too to try to solicit tips about the identity, the location rather, or the whereabouts of these Sandworm hackers.
And this is also kind of full circle too, because when you're talking about the governments and how they're utilizing these resources, it reminds us all that they're playing, like governments and the individual at home hacking are playing in the same sandbox. We were saying something like this earlier, but my mind immediately goes to at what point how do I want to say this? This is a really complicated way of saying a simple thing, and I don't want to overcomplicate it. But at what point do people who are fighting in the modern day for, the utopian, let's say Web3 individual rights, which includes everything, freedom, liberty with your privacy, stuff like that, versus governments needing to compete to make sure that they carry out their job of protecting their citizens, at what point did those come head to head and actually lead to infighting between a government and its own people? It feels like we're already there.
Well, I think that the story, I mean, this is maybe more about security than privacy, but but those things are pretty intertwined. The question of where there are these competing interests. There's the government wanting to be able to break into everything for what they would describe as national security.
Yeah.
And that's legitimate. But then that competes with us wanting to have privacy, to have security in our devices. And those things are going to be at odds. Like and I would sort of like to, and sometimes I feel like I would rather that the NSA just dumped its whole whatever secret collection of 0 days it might have, just put them on, give them all to Microsoft, Google, whoever, Apple, and have them fix all those things. But then that does mean that they can't play offense. They can't there's always this tension between defense and offense. It's a really difficult ethical question. Would you like software to be perfectly secure? That means that terrorists and Vladimir Putin and whoever have perfectly secure software that cannot be hacked by the NSA to spy on them. And it also means that Sandworm can't attack us at the same time or whatever. We also, our devices are secure as well.
And you're also assuming that they didn't find things, right? Like other governments and stuff.
That's true. And but I actually do. Well, it's a really difficult question of if the NSA this sometimes happens that the NSA finds a bug and is exploiting it, and then it turns out that the Chinese found it too, and they're also exploiting it. Sometimes it's even been the case that the NSA uses a bug, uses a hacking tool, and the Chinese, this happened with China, not with Russia, observed it, saw it used against them, reverse engineered it, and used it back on us. That has happened as well. So, or it could happen that, as in the case of what happened with NotPetya, that an NSA tool leaks and is directly used against on American hospitals and things.
Yeah.
So there is this endless debate and impossible balancing act between defense and offense. I don't know. I don't really think that we can technically make our government stop hacking, but I think what I would argue for is that what we need is a kind of Geneva Convention for cyber war, for hacking.
But then you need people to follow it too.
Right. I mean, it's true that that Russia is violating the Geneva Convention in Ukraine right now. Nonetheless, it doesn't mean that the Geneva Convention is meaningless. It still sets a baseline for how militaries and governments should operate in the world. I think there's no, I mean, I think that anyway, it's our best hope for like, you know, a kind of civilized approach to like human interaction and even conflict. Like you draw some lines, like you know, maybe it may be that like we can at least get some countries, hopefully Russia even, to agree like, yeah, it's okay to hack each other's governments. It's okay to hack each other's militaries for sure. It's, you know, but if you touch a hospital and we get you, you're going to The Hague. It's not just an act of war. It's a war crime, you know? And that's really important. Like, to try to draw any boundaries like that is really worthwhile, I think, because if we can just at least, like, you know, there's a $10 million bounty on these Sandworm hackers' heads. You know, if
it's not that much though, too. That's the other thing. I'm just thinking of that.
No, but it's maybe enough for their Russian colleagues
possibly
to rat them out through a Tor hidden service where they can't get caught. You know,
maybe
that's all it means. It's like, and if we can just instill some fear in these people that like, oh, you're gonna get charged with a war crime for this, because like there's hacking and then there's like truly criminal war crime hacking, cyber war crimes, then maybe we can, you know, rein this in to some degree. But that's I mean, you know, I'm always more there's a whole world of concern about privacy, like who is spying on us and collecting our information. But you know, the story of Sandworm is about like a far more disruptive and destructive form of hacking, where like, you know, they're like messing with the infrastructure of civilization and hospitals and power grids and water supplies and oil refineries. Like I think maybe that needs to be our first set of red lines that we draw.
Then it comes back to something you raised though earlier, which is a problem, admittedly, and that is attribution. So all these countries, let's say all the world powers, good, bad, indifferent, whatever, agreed at some sort of Geneva Convention for cybercrime, cyber attacks and hacking and stuff on a set of standards, but then was able to cloak enough doubt in future attacks that it was them that they could say, we didn't do shit.
Well, so the attribution problem is really interesting. It's kind of like an outdated idea. I know I'm the one that brought it up. It's real. You cannot immediately know who did a cyber attack, usually. The NSA has the ability to figure it out faster than like I do, because they can hack the hackers.
I hope so.
They have human spies inside the Russian government who can tell them the answer, things like that. And you know, in one case, Dutch hackers hacked the security cameras of the SVR and were literally watching them carry out cyber attacks, and could, you know, so they knew who was doing it. And there's very often the case that like the United States has hacked the hackers and can watch over their shoulders as they do something, and then they know who it was. The attribution problem is not like
there's ways around it.
Exactly. Yeah, it just takes time usually, and it definitely takes time to. You know, often they don't want to tell. Like the NSA doesn't just make all that public because they don't want to burn their sources and methods and stuff. So it has to. You know, you have to build up evidence. More in like the court of law. Sandworm's hackers, you know, so in the book, like based on technical evidence from my sources and researchers who are like the real detectives in the story, they told me, you know, this one guy, John Hultquist, the one who actually named Sandworm, in the end of the book says, Andy, I think Sandworm is Unit 74455 of the GRU.
Who was he again? John Hultquist?
He now works at a company called Mandiant, which is kind of like the sort of, I don't know, like the for-profit fire department of cybersecurity. Like they just go to they're the incident responders for every major hack, every major breach. And they're really good at what they do. When he first found Sandworm was at like this little tiny company called Eyesight Partners. And they were the first ones to see these mysterious hacks where like this group of hackers who happened to have like references to the science fiction novel Dune in their code.
Yes, that's what
we're breaking into all these targets, NATO targets, Eastern Europe, Ukraine.
That's reassuring.
That's why they were called Sandworm, because it's a reference to the book. Well, anyway, yeah. So John, you know, years later, he's the one who told me, like, yeah, based on this evidence, like, I can connect the dots and show, I think that Sandworm is Unit 74455, the GRU. It took, in fact, a few months after my book came out, before it was first the State Department that said, we now are, like, releasing the fact that Sandworm is this unit of the GRU. That turned out to be correct.
Did they get in touch with you?
They did tell me they were going to do it. They gave me like a tip that they were
heads up.
like we are going to release this finding today.
Was that still during Trump's administration?
It was, yeah.
Really?
It was in late 2020.
It's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, Trump's relationship, the Trump administration's stance on Russian hacking is really complicated. Like,
yes.
And you can almost see from the outside that there were like tussles internally, some of which I heard about, and
I don't spend a lot of time defending the Trump administration on this podcast. Where I will defend them on this particular topic is that they were forced on the defensive on some things that were not true, such that all, and we kind of touched this earlier, but such that all the things that were true and very provable put them in a position where like they felt like they couldn't admit it. So it's surprising to me, and actually this is a positive development. I'm just finding out about this. I didn't know this, but it's surprising to me that like Mike Pompeo's State Department, anyone in there, was recognizing this while he was still in office. I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been really negligent not to call out Sandworm eventually, and it took some time, but to be really like bipartisan or whatever, like to be fair about this, the first Blackout attack happened in the Obama administration, and it was, I talked to Obama's cyber czar kind of guy.
Who's that?
J. Michael Daniel. He was the cyber coordinator for the Obama White House. And he told me that, like, as soon as it happened, they knew it was probably Russia that had done this, that had caused the first ever blackout in Ukraine, first ever blackout anywhere, but it happened in Ukraine, and to be triggered by hackers. And yet they didn't do anything about it. They didn't. They did. There was a sort of delegation of Americans sent over to try to understand what had happened in a very sort of like deliberative Obama sort of way, but there was no statement saying like, Russia, how dare you attack civilian critical infrastructure? This shall never happen again. Like, this is a war crime, whatever. Like, nothing like that. There was nobody named Russia. Nobody said anything. And this was supposed to be the red line, that we had talked about for years. Like, well, it's okay to do spying or this, but if you cause a blackout. But then it happened, and there was just crickets.
Do you think part of that, though, is underground diplomacy? Well, diplomacy is an interesting word to use there, but some sort of positioning so as not to incite them publicly?
I don't know, of course, but I don't think that there was like underground signaling or whatever. After the Russian hacking of the 2016. Not hacking the election, but the interference in the election. J. Michael Daniel told me that he sent they have this cyber hotline kind of thing, like there's a nuclear one where it's like, let's all so that the White House can communicate directly to the Kremlin to try to defuse a nuclear conflict. They have that, and I guess it can be used for lots of things. But he sent a message to the Kremlin. The Obama White House did, to say, cut it out. We know you hacked the DNC and the Clinton campaign. And nothing like that was ever sent about any attacks in Ukraine. And the reason for that really was like, well, that's just Ukraine's problem. Ukraine is not NATO. Ukraine is not the EU. In general, like the Obama administration's attitude was, well, like, that's not our problem, which I think was really the wrong approach. And J. Michael Daniel has essentially said to me, like, it was just too early. We've learned a lot since then. I think he's basically said, like, I would not do that today. I would have taken a more aggressive approach. But that's kind of like the
hindsight's 2020.
This is, you can't, like, not fault the Obama administration too for not reacting to this, not trying to stop Sandworm when they could have really said, like, Russia, cut it out. We know what you're doing. Instead, they let it grow until, it became NotPetya.
Obama, and you could say this about pretty much every administration during Putin's run, in fairness, but Obama's policy towards Putin was off, and actually probably one thing you could give Mitt Romney credit for was in 2012, he was pretty adamant about that, and Obama was like, what do you want the Cold War called and wants their policy back, and it's like, well, that didn't age too well.
No, I remember that debate where was it a debate where Romney said, like, our number one adversary is Russia, and everybody kind of laughed at him. It's strange to look back on that. I think that, like, the Obama administration, like, J. Michael Daniel is a smart guy. He did some smart things to try to kind of create global cyber policy and, like, control bad actors. But if the Obama administration moved slowly, they thought about stuff. They, like, made deliberative, considered decisions that sometimes were not fast enough or aggressive enough. And I think the Trump administration failed in a different way to rein in Sandworm because, I don't know, they were less just disorganized, I think. And also, I think, I did actually hear from one person, like one of the detectives tracking that second blackout, that he tried to, like, he had a briefing scheduled with he briefed the Trump White House, but not the president, of course. And then that was sort of like run up to the president, but there was a sense like, well, you just don't talk to the president about Russian hackers. Like, we're not going to deal with that right now. Like, I think it was too hot of a topic. And the 2016, the question of, like, Russian hacker support for Trump was such a third rail that, like, it kind of just complicated every attempt to respond to Sandworm too. But you have to give credit to the Trump administration that they did 8 months after NotPetya finally say this was the worst cyber attack in history. This was the Russian military that did this. And then they imposed some new sanctions a month after that. So it was like too little, too late, but like something.
Yes.
Now, there's just a kind of evolution happening, and I think the way people understand these things, and not to, like, give too much credit to the Biden White House, or but they have responded very quickly to the most recent Sandworm attacks. Like,
what's been going on there? What have they been doing?
So Sandworm is still out there. They've been indicted and, like, apparently a bounty put on their head, but they're, like, out there and active
during this war.
And they did try to use the same kind of blackout malware in Destroyer, Crash Override again, to cause a blackout in Kyiv. Or, I'm sorry, was it Kyiv, or I think it was several regions of Ukraine. Okay. Just earlier this month, the Ukrainian government says that they caught it and stopped it in time, which is really interesting, and maybe true. There's a kind of fog of war.
There's a fuck ton of that.
And my colleague Patrick Howell O'Neill at MIT Tech Review is a great reporter, and he got, like, an earlier secret report. It was, like, not supposed to be shared, but he got it, and it from the Ukrainian government saying actually it had caused a blackout in 9 substations. The Ukrainian government told me that was incorrect, and that was just a preliminary report, but, like, it's still not exactly clear what happened there. And the Ukrainian government has, like, a lot of interest in continuing the narrative that they are like that they're winning this war. And it may well be that they stopped this one in time. There's been, like, a lot of investment in Ukrainian cybersecurity. The U.S. government has, like, talked about sending in people to work side by side, even with Ukrainian cybersecurity officials.
Which is, by the way, and here's a good point. Like, we talk about no boots on the ground. Mm-hmm. Obviously, like, we don't want to see endless wars like we've had, and it's a weird dance that we're in right now. But in the modern world, what's the difference between that and sending soldiers on the ground?
Well, we don't know exactly. I don't know exactly what that meant it was the head of like U.S. Cyber Command who talked about sending people in. But I don't. It may have just been to Poland. Well, you can do these things from a distance. Is the thing. Like you don't. That's the thing about that it's a weird world of cyber. Their distance is no defense. Boots on the ground. What does that mean? There's like all of our boots are on the ground everywhere in the world as soon as we connect to the internet. So like, it's all just like I have no doubt that U.S. Cyber Command is all up in Russia's critical infrastructure and could start causing blackouts the second that they get the order to do that. So are they like already deployed in this conflict? In some sense, maybe they are. Like it's all the rules are off. Like the rules of physics themselves have completely changed. So like all of our notions of, well, that's a far away conflict. Well, we don't have any boots on the ground there. It's all like the rules are rewritten.
Completely. I think this is the first time in the internet era. Well, I want to be careful how I say this because I don't want to undercut things that have happened. But you're talking about a world power, Russia, invading the boundaries of a sovereign nation that is also 45 million people, that is geographically very, very advantageous and is an act of aggression. But this is that all being put together. This is the first time in the modern world that's moving from this quote unquote Web 2 to Web 3 era. Like during this time, even like during Web 2, where we are seeing something on that scale. And we are therefore day by day, we're only fucking 8-9 weeks in this thing, whatever it is, we're day by day seeing this play out. And, we've treated it like it's been happening forever now, but the number of variables here and directions this could go in the stratosphere of technology is stressful to think about it, to say the least.
Right. I mean, this is, I don't know. What is it? It's certainly like, we've never seen conflicts on this scale that involves Russia and its cyber war capabilities. We are seeing like a full scale physical invasion of Ukraine, which by the way, like the war in 2014 was quite limited in like the eastern regions, and they seized Crimea, but they did so without any actual bullets fired.
Well, it depends where you were. Crimea,
exactly,
yes, but
not in
Donetsk and Lugansk, no.
Exactly,
a lot of people died.
Absolutely, and they did over many years as this cyber war was taking place. Like, so that was an interesting situation because cyber war, I think, has always been useful as a way to like project power way beyond the front. You have a limited war in the east, but you can launch your cyber attacks all the way to the capital, even to the west of the country, which is the first Blackout attack was in the western regions, and make those people feel like they're at risk, like they're in a failed state or whatever. Distrust their governments or make the outside world feel like this is not a place to put investment or whatever you are trying to do. It's really different when you launch a full-scale invasion. And Russia, at least in the first phase of its war in Ukraine, it was trying to take Kyiv, trying to take the south, trying to take the east all at the same time. And cyber war, I think, like kind of fell by the wayside because if you're actually got, as you said, boots on the literal boots on the grounds, like everywhere in the country, you're trying to like overwhelm them with physical force, then you can blow up a power station. You don't need to hack it, And they did do that, and they seized lots of power stations. Now they're falling back to the east for this new phase, and it's totally unknown what's going to happen next. But it seems to me like that actually, for Ukraine, that's the kind of scenario where they'll start launching cyber attacks again, because it's now a limited war limited to the east. It's going to be much more intense fighting, I think, than from 2014 to 20, to
Seems
now.
That way,
but,
yes.
But it does like create a kind of geography, as you say, where like you want to project power again all the way across the country. So, I think that we're going to see something more like what we saw Sandworm doing in those like really action-packed years for them. From really 2014 to 2017 is when NotPetya hits. I think we may be back to that like very, I don't know, hot cyber war, if that's like a word for it.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, like I think the other reason we have to really pay attention to to Sandworm's capabilities, to what Russia can do, is because of the new larger Cold War that we are in. Like, we have put Russia in this box, and they will be lashing out in every possible way to, to try to reassert themselves. And I think that cyber is going to be a big part of that.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. Please hit that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.